Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge YouTube channel. I just woke up and saw overnight that Nicholas Dlamini, the rider for NTT Pro Cycling, formerly called Dimension Data Cycling Team World Tour Team, he just was involved in an incident in Tabletop Mountain National Park at the Silvermine area. A few people have messaged me on Instagram asking me to make a video about this, including cyclists living in the Cape Town area. I first saw this on Instagram and it's pretty distressing, so if you want to skip forward a minute or two, then do that now. You can see here, Nicholas is like pinned up against the car by like 4 rangers, and a few things like stood out to me straight away that were like really sinister, and that was they clearly weren't concerned that he was like, he's a 60 kilo dude or less wearing road shoes. They weren't concerned that he was like a threat to them or anything. It's not like when, you know, a 15-year-old kid in America gets jumped on by like 7 cops. Or Australia. They have one guy pinning him up against the car and the rest are just standing around like there's nothing really they're concerned about. So they didn't think he was like a threat to their physical safety or anything. Secondly, and even more disturbingly, is when the guy who did this pins him up against the car, once he breaks his arm, which he broke Nick Dlamini's arm, and I won't show you the x-ray photos because that's kind of like an invasion of his privacy, but when he broke his arm, he then stops pinning him up against the car and then puts him in the back of the van. So it's clear that he wanted to actually inflict this injury on Nicholas Dlamini because he'd already had him under control when he had him pinned with his arm behind his back. But then he's like, no, I'm going to break your arm, fam, to teach you a lesson or whatever was in his sick mind. And to give some context to this, Nicholas Dlamini was training in the Tabletop Mountain National Park. That's monitored or regulated by South African National Parks officials or rangers. Those are the people manhandling in the video. Now, apparently you need a permit or a day pass or a license to be in the national park. That being said, even if Nicholas was like lippy, didn't have the relevant day pass, that in no way justifies having his arm broken by this clown. Anyway, NTT's statement says that unfortunately his broken arm is going to jeopardise him being the first black South African to potentially participate in the Tour de France in 2020, and he was vying for Tokyo Olympics road race selection as well. So that's really unfortunate that this has happened to a guy who could be like a beacon or a role model for South African cycling, and he's getting his arm broken by government officials. And apparently the reason he was so mad was because they had pulled him off his bike when he was descending after an interval or whatever. They pulled him off his bike, grabbed his handlebars at like 60 k's an hour. So obviously it caused him to crash. So obviously he was mad. And then they're like, we're also going to break your arm now. And I'd just like to thank Mr. Lecoq, who actually had the courage to film this whilst he was also being intimidated by the SANParks officials, because he filmed this and because people shared it on Twitter, and hopefully, you know, I'm trying to contribute to widely publicising this incident. Because it's widely publicised, that actually creates action quickly in government, regardless of what country it is. But in this case, you know, the Environmental Affairs Minister Barbara Creasy has already directed SANParks to suspend all the officials that were in that video. She's already visited Nicholas Dlamini in hospital and kind of intimated that she would support him exercising his rights, which I read as he should definitely sue SANParks, or NTT should sue SANParks for what they've done to him. Whereas if this hadn't been filmed and Nicholas just said, oh, these SANPark rangers broke my arm, they'd probably, maybe nothing would have happened. Maybe they said, oh, we turned up after he'd crashed and he'd broken his arm. And I think why these videos or things like this, when they happen to World Tour riders, create such like a visceral reaction in the cycling community is because, and I remember this happened when Jan Frodeno was cycling on the Sunshine Coast, and he made a number of statements about how he was appalled by how impatient and dangerous motorists were in sort of Queensland, where I live, in Sunshine Coast region. And it creates such a reaction in sort of the broader cycling community, because these are the World Tour guys. You know, Nicholas Dlamini is maybe the best South African cyclist, or one of the most promising young South African cyclists, 24 years old. Jan Frodeno is the best Ironman triathlete in the world. And they're not immune to, as vulnerable road users, they're not immune to these horrible things happening to them, where, you know, if it's aggression on the roads from motorists, if it's sort of national parks officials having some sort of vendetta for whatever reason against cyclists. Whereas in our minds, I sort of think, oh, well, the World Tour guys, you know, they should be able to train like in a safe, normal environment. They should be immune to this, but they're not. So what does that mean for amateurs, I guess? I think this is such a big deal for South Africa because you know, especially Cape Town, is because tourism is a massive part of the Cape Town economy. Tabletop Mountain National Park is a key tourist attraction. You know, I've been there when I was playing cricket I was playing cricket at Rondebosch and Bishops and Wynberg and whatever. I was playing cricket in Cape Town for a while, and I'm also a cycling tourist, and I want to go to Africa at some point in the next 18 months and go cycling. And at this point, it's looking like Rwanda will be the best place for me to go cycling, whereas Cape Town has perfect climate, should have perfect training roads and all that. But if I was a cycle tourist looking at that, like, there's no way I'm going to go to Cape Town. Like, there's no way I'm going to go train, even consider riding around Tabletop Mountain National Park after seeing that, even if these officials are suspended. So it does hurt the local economy on whatever scale. And NTT's statement alludes to this in their second bullet point when they called upon SANParks to urgently account for what sort of message does this send to the broader cycling community and local and foreign tourists who want to visit the national park. But anyway, go to Nicholas Dlamini's Instagram page, send him your well wishes. It's a real shame that this has happened just after Christmas. Thanks for watching. Ciao.